Welcome to the Melinda Eitzen Show. I'm Melinda. Today we have with us Suzanne Wooten, attorney, former judge, and full-time mediator. Hello. Suzanne, thank you for joining us.
Oh, good to see you. It's always great to see you.
I'm so glad you're here. So you have a very wonderful historical practice. You've done many things, and now you're working too hard, in my opinion.
I've heard that.
As a full-time mediator.
Correct.
So tell us where your practice is. What part of the Metroplex?
So my main office is in McKinney. So I've got a really nice facility on the square. We've got a bunch of conference rooms. It was sort of my dream to have a mediation center done. But since I do a lot of remote mediation, people can be anywhere. They don't have to come to McKinney. I've had people, last week I had a lawyer in Croatia.
Wow.
So if you're watching, you know who I'm talking about. I've had people in Taiwan, Brazil, England, London, California, you name it, for the remote practice. So it doesn't really matter where I physically am located, but my main base is the McKinney office.
Well, and as you know, I'm also a mediator, but not full-time. I do it 1 to 2 days a week. But with COVID, we all had to go remote, right? We all learned how to use Zoom or something similar in order to do it. What has been your experience with that, and what do you think the success rate is using something remote?
So I'll tell you, it's been a very interesting evolution, I guess I would call it. Because you're right, in the beginning we were all in freak out mode for lots of reasons, right? Not just the fact that we're like, how do we do Zoom or Teams, or how do we do DocuSign? Because realtors were the ones who used that, right?
Exactly.
And thankfully, I think all the mediators kind of pulled together, here's some forms I'm using, here's some language, here's a platform I like, and we all kind of hit the ground running, had to figure out breakout rooms and not putting people together, because that's usually a bad idea. But I think in the beginning, everyone was just a little nervous about, is this going to work? Is it effective? Because there are some people who think a mediator has to be in your face and yell and scream, which I know your style is like my style. We don't do that. You know, we're not there to make their lives worse, for sure. So I think the platform was helpful, because then they didn't feel physically as uncomfortable, because we didn't have to get close, even if we weren't that type of mediator. But on top of that, the fact that they weren't on the same floor or physical location as whoever they're in a lawsuit with, whether it's a family law case or a probate case, or even some, I do civil stuff too, car accident or whatever, that has really retained its value over all these, 4 years now, because the settlement rates are about 5% higher than in person by Zoom.
Isn't that interesting? I've had the same experience. I thought at first, oh no, I think one reason that I'm an effective mediator is I can connect with the people as human beings.
Sure.
And I thought, well, I'd be able to do that over Zoom. And I think it's been amazing. Yes, you can still connect. It's really about the voice is what I've realized. I don't even have to see them on the Zoom. Like some people, their Zoom quality is poor. They're sitting in a weird part of the room and you can't even literally see their face.
Or they're laying in bed. I've seen
Yes.
that.
And I still feel like if they can hear me and I can hear them, that I can still make the human connection that is important for them to feel heard and understood and for us to make progress. So I've had the same experience, that it's been very successful. I do both in person and Zoom, but I think I'm still doing a little bit more Zoom by their preference. And one thing a client said to me is, I would not have been able to do this if I hadn't been with my dog.
True.
So there's some comforts of their home that we can't reproduce in a conference room. And I had never even thought about that.
A cat, a dog, some people are smokers. They can stand outside with their phones, still be on Zoom.
Yes.
But remember, too, we have lots of cases whether there's allegations of family violence, or we've heard a lot of financial abuse now, too. Or verbal or whatever, whether real or unreal, their perception is it's real.
Yes.
And if they know they're in the same location, that's nerve-wracking. But on top of that, some voices carry. And sometimes someone laughs loud or yells, or, we get people crying and yelling and things like that. That makes them even more anxious, which I think kind of focuses them on not settlement, but on their own anxiety and what's happening and the other person, and are they going to come down the hall? So I think the fact that we have this platform still usable for these cases is wonderful. Plus, I hadn't even thought about it until the other day when someone mentioned, because there's an out. If you have family violence, you don't necessarily have to go to mediation. I'm hoping judges aren't doing that as much now if a remote option is available.
Right.
Because think about it. If you don't go to mediation and you go to trial instead, or a hearing, whatever it may be, now you are sitting next to that person and they're staring at you when you're on the stand. Maybe you're re-traumatized.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that it's kind of evolving to, hey, we've got this other platform that is really effective and protects people and gives them that comfort level to maybe actually settle their cases instead of having that stranger in a black dress make their ultimate decisions for them.
I agree. Yes, we have, not only are they on the same floor, but the parking, right?
Yes.
Like the parking lot, they're worried about, are they going to approach me in the parking lot? And so, people are walking people to the parking lot and all that. Well, if you're on Zoom, there's no worry about parking lot drama.
I actually had one right before COVID where one party did not want the divorce and the other party did. And we tried to stagger them leaving, right?
Yes.
Just in case. And the problem was the person who left first, the other person saw out the window and took off and chased after him. And it wasn't a violent thing, but there was begging, crying. And so we had to try to go out there and which is awkward.
That drama.
I'm not a therapist, so
Right.
yeah. So we have alleviate that risk too of the resistant party who doesn't want the divorce maybe trying to either guilt them or persuade them in some manner to not get the divorce completed.
Yes. Well, that's been excellent. Well, I know from personal experience that you're a great mediator because I've mediated with you for years. And I was telling you before the break, I can't even get in with you because you're so popular. But you have tried to expand in a way because you're housing a bunch of other mediators now.
Correct.
So tell us about that.
All right. We now have a team of 8, the grade 8, I don't know. The first person who came on board was an attorney, John Stooksbury. He is a 50-plus year board certified civil litigator because I was getting a lot of court appointments on civil cases and I can't manage family and civil and I needed help. And he's awesome. Sweet, nice man, very intelligent, very soothing. I think his grandfather demeanor might help, but he's stern, but he gets cases done. Then I added Keith Becker, who's a lawyer out of Prosper, used to be a Dallas attorney. I'm sure you know Keith. And he does family law. And then Judge Rhonda Hunter joined. And then Judge Don Turner joined. And they're both family law. And then I think Judge Hunter also does some probate and guardianships. I added, Michael Poole joined. Sorry, there's 8. Yeah, I got to count. 1, 2. Michael Poole joined. He does family law and he does some civil. And then Dale Rose, who is a civil litigator who does a lot more of the civil cases in McKinney too. So now we have 8. And we have an online calendar. You can see everybody's. You can book it that way. We try to be as convenient as possible for people so you're not waiting for an email response or a phone call. You can just get in there and make your reservation and I've got Miss Jackie at my office, is awesome, by the way. She handles everybody. She does a lot of petting of the hysterical.
So what is it called, the group?
North Texas Litigation Solutions.
Oh, great. So they can Google that and we'll put that on the screen so people can find you. So for people who don't know, we don't know who's watching today, but mediation, what is mediation? How does it work and who's attending?
Sure. The basic way to explain it is it's a informal negotiation process in that I typically always have parties separate. I do not have joint sessions.
Agreed. Me too.
Thank you.
No joint.
I don't find that helpful because, it's all about us, the mediator, and we don't want to scrape people off the ceiling for an hour. But yeah, so informal process in that we can talk about what we need to. We focus on what are the issues. And I think I'm going to coin your phrase from this morning, we remain in the solution all day as much as we can. Sometimes we have to pull people back in to, hey, focus on the solution. And it's a way to help them resolve their issues in a binding fashion, which is the formal part of the process in that we get a deal, we type it up, whatever those terms are, everybody signs it, binding on them and the court, whether it's pre-suit or the litigation's already pending. So they can rely on the hard work they did because they've got that closure. Maybe paperwork needs to be done, but the beauty is it's really a creative process.
The terms are set. No buyer's remorse.
Oh yeah, no takesy-backsy, that's the legal term.
And people like that. Like, I know if I sign this and you sign this, we have a deal.
Correct.
Okay, so mediation could be with a lawyer and a client in one room, lawyer and client in one room, or it could just be clients, no lawyers, true?
True.
And that's called pro se when they represent themselves.
Correct.
So some mediators do not want to work with pro ses. They only want lawyers and the client with them. How about you?
So I handle mediations with pro se parties. Sometimes one side has a lawyer, one side is representing themselves, or both sides are unrepresented, or both sides have lawyers, and maybe I know you may have had these property division where the pots and the pans, the lawyers are like, don't pay me, you guys just go.
Yes,
Those are fun. Thank you, all you lawyers. Yeah, but no, it's okay, it's fine. I mean, the fact is, they're not a lot different in that I don't give legal advice as the mediator anyway, since I'm the neutral, although I am an attorney, not my role at all, because I don't pick sides. So in that regard, it's the same as when they're represented and unrepresented. We can talk about the law anyway. I mean, I've got the family code. I can say, here's what the family code says. I can't tell you how to interpret it or what the judge will do, but we don't know what the judge will do anyway. They're not mind readers. It can be more challenging when I do have a situation where maybe they need an attorney to say, look, this is not your property. This is separate property. It's her grandmother's Afghan that she gave to her when she was born. I mean, or whatever it could be. And I can try to talk through that, but I don't really hammer people because that's not my role. I'm not their advocate.
Yeah.
So it can be challenging, but I represent, sorry. Can you fix that? I handle lots of pro se cases, and they're fine. I mean, I think people appreciate having the ability to get it resolved with someone who's got experience, who can help guide them, but they make their own decisions.
Okay, so let's say it's pro se, and now you're typing what's called the mediated settlement agreement. Who types the decree?
Well, I always tell them, I can't do that. Mediators can type MSAs, mediated settlement agreements. They are absolutely ethically not permitted to, and there's all sorts of rules. You've seen them, opinions.
Yep, I agree
We
with you.
can't draft orders. We can't draft decrees. That's not our, because we don't represent either party.
Right.
So I typically, with pro se people, will say, you all are welcome to try it yourself. Personally, I don't recommend it because if you mess up a decree, it's hard to unmess it up. I use other terms.
You'll spend more money trying to
Yes,
fix
so-
it than just doing it right the first
But there are
time.
tons of lawyers, and I have kind of a list of people who've told me, hey, if you've got pro se parties who just need me to draft the decree based on the settlement agreement, and I give them just a whole bunch of names and say, I don't know their rates, I don't know what they'll do, but here are people to call. And I give both sides the same names. Here, you guys use somebody to do drafting, because the mediator can't do it. So there is that final step, and you do have to make it clear to the pro se people that this doesn't mean you're divorced just because the settlement agreement is signed.
Right.
There is another step, but they usually get it.
Yeah, so I also will do a pro se case. It's not my favorite because I worry that they're coming in with an expectation that I am going to give them legal advice, and I'm not allowed to as the
Right.
mediator. So whenever somebody hires me, I contact them in advance and say, I highly recommend that you hire a lawyer. You're going to need one anyway to draft the decree. Why don't you just have them come to mediation with you, even if it's limited scope representation, right? That they're never going to go to trial. Their contract says that they're only going to, you just pay them for their day, right? In mediation. That's what I recommend, but I will do it if they say, absolutely not, I want to do it myself. They have a right to do that. And I don't mind. I like people,
Sure.
so I'm happy to meet them. But then they always turn to me and say, so how does it work? Like, what really happens?
Right.
How do you think that applies? And to your point, sometimes it helps for the lawyer to be able to tell them what's worth fighting about and what's not. And let's not fight about the grandmother's Afghan, because there's no fight to have.
Right. I mean, you can talk about, well, the Constitution in Texas says, but those sometimes the words are like, I don't care. I want it. The grandmother gave it to me. But those things do periodically come up. But it's interesting. I've seen, the gamut from people who just don't have the funds to hire lawyers to people who really should probably hire lawyers.
Yes.
Because they have plenty of funds that they need to make sure that they're not only getting legal advice for, but often tax advice, which I don't give at all,
yes.
period. I'm not a tax lawyer.
Yes.
Never have been. We make it really clear. I don't know the ramifications of this. Even when I'm representing my own clients,
Yes.
I'll get a CPA or a tax expert in if it's something that needs that kind of advice.
Yeah, the way they're dividing things might have tax effect. Sometimes people divide something in a mediated settlement agreement. Turns out you can't divide.
Yes, I've heard of those things.
And so they need a little advice on that also, just due to the structure of that entity.
Sure.
Well, let's say that somebody came to you and said, what is the best way to be prepared for mediation to have the best result? Because it's not an inexpensive day, right? They're paying us as the mediator. They're paying 2 lawyers if they have lawyers representing. It's an investment.
It is.
It's much less expensive than trying your case, in my opinion. So it's a worthy investment. And I think they'll get a better deal that everybody's more happy with. So it's a worthy investment, but it is an investment. And I've seen it all, and I'm sure you have all levels of preparation and and unpreparation.
Yes. Well, I always tell people I don't need anything formal. Even if you just send me an email saying, here's the gist, they've got kids, they were married this long, they've got a house, retirement. Really, I need to know not just kind of the big picture, but what do we think the sticking points are going to be? And are there any triggers about it? If you're like, look, this person's really determined to keep all of their retirement.
Yes.
My client might be willing to do that, but we need to tax affect it, or there may be some nuances. It helps me to know what I'm walking into.
Yes.
I will tell you, though, the number one thing that helps is if the attorneys will exchange their information in advance. I don't mind if we're like, okay, let's get current balances. We can screenshot or do whatever. But if they're saying, I need bank records for the last 6 years, all we're doing is spending, completely.
And they'll spend half a day digging through the information. No, I 100% agree. This is my advice to the world. When you book a mediation, book 2 hours the day before to do because you do want the numbers to be current, right? So that's why some of that happens, is we want today's number. Okay, well, yesterday's number is probably close enough.
Sure.
And gather all of that, send it to the other person, ask them to send it to you. Like, just build that into, when I go to mediation, I have to have 2 hours before to make sure my spreadsheet is right, get everything updated, so that you're not just paying people to sit around.
Right, it's a waste for us to be like, do you have this month? What about that?
Yes.
I actually say take a step even farther back, maybe 10 days before mediation. Sit down with or without your client and make sure, okay, did I get those records? They were going to give me that? Because we don't want the day before mediation, I see the email, I don't know if we can come tomorrow because they didn't give us the whatever return.
And it's something they can't even get at that point.
Right.
Like
banks won't mail it.
Right.
Exactly. So maybe even 10 days. Make sure you have what you
do both.
Yes. Everything you need, and then make sure it's current. You're ready to go.
Yes, I agree. Well, I like what you said. I feel the same. I want a letter of what's going on, and that's the main thing I want.
Yes.
I mean, it's helpful to have the style of the case.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah, we need that.
So one pleading, but I don't need to read all the pleadings.
Right.
I do like a spreadsheet. I think mediators handle spreadsheets all different ways. So there's one famous mediator in town who takes over the spreadsheet or builds his own, takes control of the spreadsheet. So some mediators want to take the spreadsheet duty. Some, both sides have their own spreadsheets. And what do you do? How do you handle the spreadsheet?
So typically, I don't mind whoever spreadsheet we want to use. And you're right. Some people are very territorial. They've got their magic formulas. And I have learned quite a bit of Excel and had to teach myself, and I've learned from other people, but I'm not an Excel professional in regard to knowing all the different fancy formulas.
Neither. No, me neither.
But if one person has one and the other side's fine with it, that's fine.
Yeah.
I will absolutely control it if need be. Happy to do that. If the lawyer wants to do it, that's fine. But how I typically operate with the spreadsheets is say, if you're going to make a change on it, highlight it in yellow. Yes, thank you, Jinx. Highlight it, because then when I send it back to the other side, when we're looking at it again, which is the other benefit, I think, of remote, is we can screen share everything.
I know, I do like that.
We have saved so many trees by not printing and printing.
I
and printing.
agree.
That way they know what exactly changed on the spreadsheet.
Yes.
You'd be amazed, though, and you've probably seen it, how many people, they haven't talked to their clients about how to interpret a spreadsheet.
Oh, and
they don't get it, that the net's at the bottom.
That takes a while.
Yeah. Why are we not 50-50 every single thing? We're like, because they're offsetting.
That would be part of the prep with the client,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Is have a Zoom session with your client or have them in person at your office and get them familiarized with how that spreadsheet works. You should be doing that anyway because you're putting together an offer.
Right. And they need to know what the numbers are anyway, correct?
So, but even if you don't have an offer ready yet, for them to just spend a little time familiarizing so they're not uncomfortable saying yes to something because they cannot understand how we're doing it.
Right. Because it gets overwhelming for all, especially if you have a lot of detail on the spreadsheet. And when we're starting to talk about pre-tax dollars and post-tax dollars and what about, they sometimes their eyes glaze over.
Yeah.
They're like, what are we, because not everybody's a financial expert.
No, and for the busy lawyer, that's something you could have an associate do ahead or a paralegal. They don't have to give legal advice to just say, this is how the spreadsheet works.
Right, how they function.
Yes, and some clients are sophisticated and they could play around with the spreadsheet themselves once they understand how we all
Right.
approach it. And some are not, and that it gives them anxiety for the first time to see it.
It does.
Yeah, I would say my least favorite situation is when usually one side is prepared at least. So somebody comes in and the other side takes advantage of the work they did,
hey,
right?
we'll use that.
Oh, great,
Sure.
right.
Right.
But every once in a while you walk in and you can tell neither side has done anything. They haven't had a conversation with their client and you're like, okay, so what do you have? You have a house?
Right. You're like, great. Or when they say, here's just our offer. They want this, they take this, and you keep that. And you're thinking as a mediator, I don't know what these numbers are, but it
Right.
really sounds
Right.
really bad. And so you're wanting me to take a message into that room of an offer that is probably going to make them really upset
Yes.
because they know the numbers because you haven't given them to
Right.
me. And yeah, then I have to spend an hour. It's okay. It's only a first offer. Don't freak out. There's a lot of that. Don't panic. First offers are always
Yes.
horrible. That's the other thing too, I would comment. First offers don't have to be so awful. Yes, you may have booked 8 hours. That doesn't mean we need to wait all the way up till 3:00 for
I
a
know.
realistic offer.
No.
Because clients just need to know we can be way more productive with their time if we start
Yes.
in the atmosphere, rather than in the universe. Because
Yes.
when you're trying to pull everybody down to earth, that takes not only time and energy, but again, people start shutting down because they're mad because they think,
Yes.
why would they even offer that? Well, 20 years of post-divorce maintenance at $10,000 a month.
Right.
I make $6 an hour, whatever. You've seen those,
Yeah.
okay.
Then they're like, should I just leave now? What do you think about multi-day mediations that even before the first day, they already are scheduling a couple of days, maybe spread out?
So when I have pro se parties, when both sides are pro se, a lot of times we will try to get them in for maybe an hour of a pre-mediation conference. And that one, I may have them maybe together because it's brief, but it's literally hey, here's the information that you need to be prepared for.
Oh, that's so
Have some
smart.
lists ready. What are your wish lists? You don't have to share them with each other. I'll keep it confidential, but kind of giving them the overview. And then they can already see how, maybe a little comfort level knowing, okay, I'm down to earth. We're going to work through this. But otherwise, sometimes multi-days work. Like if you have to do kids on one day or property on the other day. In collaborative cases, I do some collaborative mediation.
Yes.
Not as much as I wish, but the last couple I've done, I was kind of throughout the process. So maybe we mediated for temp orders, and then maybe we mediated if there was some kind of discovery issues, and then maybe we mediated at the final. So there are ways to keep the mediator in place that kind of keeps the flow of settlement terms and positive results versus World War III.
Yes. Well, I like it. I'm always open to a second day if we need it, especially if somebody is saying to me late in the day, I can't think anymore, I'm tired, I'm overwhelmed. But on the other hand, sometimes if they're not saying that and everybody's good to stay, we'll go late meaning after 5. I don't want to be there till midnight, but I'll stay till 7:30 or 8:30. I stayed till 10:30 once.
Well, you're
Because
talking about
they want to
marathon.
get it done. Yes.
I do not do marathon mediations because you're right. Sometimes if it's 5 or 6, 7 o'clock and we're just tweaking and maybe it's a lot of terms, it's taking a while to draft, and maybe we get done 9. I start getting panicked around 9 because I feel like people are not thinking straight.
Right.
They're tired, even if they're eating. They're possibly making bad decisions because they just want it over with. And then who are
Yes.
they going to be mad at the next day? Not just the lawyer, but the mediator. Why didn't we
Yes.
just come back another day for a few hours?
Right. So I'm always by 4 o'clock saying, well, do you think we should start looking at a second day? What are we doing? But that also helps people speed it up. If I start saying that at 4 and they realize, look, we're not nearly there yet, and she's talking about coming back and I want to get it done, they jump to a little bit more reality sometimes.
Well, and I'd say if it's 4 o'clock and I haven't even begun to think about typing,
Yeah.
it's getting late.
Yeah.
Because we have to have, you and I have to have the time to focus. I don't want to feel stressed out. When I do Zoom, I have a third room, so I go into a third
Me
breakout
too.
room
Me too.
so I can focus. And I tell the lawyers, please don't text me. And of course, the phone's text. It's okay. But yeah, so if by 4 o'clock you're not really in the mode of we need to really get typing,
Mm-hmm.
but what I do during mediation that kind of helps that process is I use an on-screen, I don't know if I've done that with you, where as we're talking about language, I'm like, well, here's my Our Family Wizard language. I'll plug it onto the
Yes.
screen. Let them all read it.
Yes.
Here's that possession schedule. This is what it's going to look like.
Yes.
And then when you get to the typing part, you can cut and paste.
Yes.
You might have to flesh out stuff, but then they have visually seen those words and those paragraphs most of the day.
The review goes a lot faster.
It does, and then they're not as confused because they're like,
Mm-hmm.
oh yeah, so it is Thursday overnight, not just
Right.
it's every Thursday
Right.
during the school year or whatever it may be.
Okay, that highlights another issue. We have a lot of terminology that we use in family law, like standard possession. And in preparation, if somebody can really illustrate all of that to their client ahead of time, so we are not defining every term all day, or we think we've defined it
yeah,
once,
right.
we think they know, and then they read it and they're like, what? That would really help their clients to feel more prepared, not as stressed out.
No, I agree because you're right. We use those, and I like to joke that we lawyers use abbreviations to make us feel special. MSA, SPO, just because, why not? But you're right. If the clients don't know or the parties don't know yet, it does. I usually say, well, Melinda, do you want to explain what a standard possession order is? to your client?
Right.
Or otherwise, I'll do it, but they should absolutely know in advance. That's the other reason, like for my immediate settlement agreements, I try to also spell out, I have a term sheet of the rights and duties. You probably have one too. So they can see when we say all other rights and duties are independent or whatever it
What
may
are
be.
we talking about?
The right to brush their teeth. I mean, they're not
Yes.
sure. And we're talking, earnings of the kids and attending school activities, all those things. So I like to have that attached as an exhibit so and I make them initial so that they see instead of just saying the rights and duties under Texas Family Code section whatever.
Right.
And the same thing with the possession schedule. I try to actually spell out as much as I can so that they see what they're talking about. Because you're right, the last thing you want is someone saying, I didn't know Thursday was every week.
Right.
I didn't know that's what that meant.
Right. So that would be easy. I just have my paralegal send them the code language in advance. So when we say standard possession, they know what that means and they can read it. And of course I should be talking to them about it too, but to have them never have seen that until the end of the day is not ideal.
No, and it works with property stuff too. If you're like, I'm sorry, but where are your documents from when you got married 20 years ago that show you had that quadrillion dollars
Yeah.
in your retirement account that's now worth $10? It's there. What? I don't have to prove that. Well,
Yes.
maybe you do have to actually prove it, and you have a higher burden.
Yeah, the whole separate property issue. That comes up a lot for me. I think that, lawyers and clients are trying to balance in their lawsuit when to mediate.
Sure.
They don't want to have to get their whole case ready for trial. That's one reason they're coming to mediation is to save some of that cost. So I think it's very common, at least in my practice, that they come and no one has proven any separate property, and they're just hoping that
You
they
remember?
will.
You
Right.
remember my aunt Becky gave me that 20,000 acres, and
Yes.
you remember?
Yes. You remember I already had a 401k at my previous job.
Remember that retirement?
And they're hoping that they will just say yes, but then when they don't, one side sometimes is like, it's your burden of proof. You haven't sent me one document.
Right.
I don't have any proof. So what's your opinion about that? Like at what point in the lawsuit is mediation the best time? How much do they need to prove up their separate property claims? I'm talking about substantial separate
Right,
property
right.
claims, not the Afghan,
Right.
but
Right.
the $100,000 401k.
Well, and if it's something like that where they have the higher burden of proof on this stuff, and if the lawyers aren't already agreeing, yeah, okay, you know what, she did have that acreage before they get married, and he did have that, and maybe we're just talking about how much did they each pay that benefited the other. Now that we've got the code change too. How did that benefit the other estate? Otherwise, they've got to get that information. I mean, if they have a threshold higher burden of clear and convincing, you've got to have that, because you know what'll happen. Even if the client's telling you, yeah, that probably, well, the lawyer's like, that they didn't meet their burden. I got to see it for malpractice reasons alone. I got to make sure I'm advising you properly with the information.
I've noticed that people don't remember their lives exactly right.
What?
So
Histories change over time? No.
So when I ask my own client, we have to gather the documents for your separate property, they're often misremembering, especially when it's, we had a house and then we sold the house and then we put the proceeds in this house. Oh, but wait, no, we didn't really, because we had to get a loan to build that house and we hadn't sold that one yet. Oh, yeah. Oh, so those aren't in there. They're someplace else. Oh, but then we sold that house. And so they're trying to make that trace.
Sure.
They start out by just saying, all that money from my prior house is in this house. Sometimes it's a little more complicated.
Or my parents lent me that money, and you've seen this a lot too, I'm sure. Here's the gift letter to the mortgage company saying it's a gift. Well, that kind of begs the question, are you committing mortgage fraud by your parents saying it's a gift, and now you're saying you owe it back, it's a loan? I mean, there's all these other nuances too that come into play when they're trying to trace things and prove stuff. And those are conversations that I think the attorneys need to have with their clients in advance. Like, look, we're kind of on sketchy territory here if it turns out that and then we wrote it off in our taxes for, all those different tendrils that can really make a giant mess of a case.
Yes.
And untangling may take more than one session. It also may not settle the case. And I have to tell you, the judge may not follow it either, because the judge has to determine the case based on what is presented. There may be all these other nuances that we can talk about in mediation that the court's never going to hear.
Yeah.
It's not always likely that the right result's going to happen because they don't have the information.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. I mean, one advantage of mediation and why I love it is we can do something more creative than the court can do. And you have a unique perspective because you were the court.
I was.
And the judge is limited, right? It's not about, does the judge like me or understand my story? The judge is limited by the law.
True.
In mediation, we do not have that limitation. If people want to agree on something outside of what the law provides, they can.
Generally, yes.
Now, they're only going to do that if you give them something they can't get from the court, probably.
True. Like, there will be like, fine, they'll give you that separate property if you'll give them this. You're right. That's the give and take you can do. And the horse trading, I guess, in mediation that can't happen at the courthouse, because the judge, you're right, is not only completely bound, but you also have witnesses who don't show up. You have witnesses that maybe don't remember things accurately either, or now magically have changed their story. We've seen that. Or the bank didn't get those documents in time. And
there's rules of evidence. And even if you know the information, you can't always get it in the form that the judge can receive it.
Correct.
Mediation, even if you can't do something creative because the other side is not very agreeable.
Okay.
You could at least get what everybody thinks the judge would do and not pay for the privilege of going to court and having the judge do it. True. So it's still advantageous to settle.
Well, and I tell people too, if everyone is not unhappy at the end, it's not a good deal. Because that one F word, I think I stole this from Coy Connor, thank you, Coy, if you're listening, is fair. It's 4 letters and it begins with an F, and I know I heard Coy say that the first time. It's true, though, because what you think is fair and what I think is fair, what the judge may think is fair, not always the same thing at all. So we can throw the fair out the window and figure out, can you live with this? Is this best for your kids? Can we all get this done? There's that price of freedom and peace. What is your peace of mind worth than the stress of trial and the expense of trial? Because the only 2 things we lawyers can guarantee is we don't know what the judge will do, and it's going to cost you money to find out. Those are the only things we can guarantee, nothing else. We may be right, we may be wrong. And sometimes it's not worth it. But I know you've had those cases where people are so dug in, and it is a Grand Canyon. Those are the tough ones for me, because if you can't build a bridge over that, you can't solve the problem. And then I feel bad because I couldn't find a solution, but some things are yes or no. You're either going to take our kids to Japan or I'm going to let you. I mean,
right. Some things don't lend themselves to as many compromise options.
Correct.
Mediation settlement rate in general is very high. How high do you think?
So it depends. So since I do a variety, the family law stuff tends to be higher, I think, than the civil and definitely probate. And if you put them in levels, I would say family, probate, then civil, because civil cases are usually you owe me money, no, you owe me money. And you got the money going the wrong direction. We're not working toward a middle. Probate is just way emotional because there's someone has passed away, obviously, and amazing how people really want other people's money. It's kind of sad in a way. So those don't always settle. If they have some emotional connection that's not really rational because of the death that's involved. So they're not as high either. But family law stuff, I don't know, anywhere from, depending on if it's a modification or a divorce, 90 to 92%.
Yeah, I think divorce is higher settlement rate than mods.
Oh, definitely. I would
Right.
agree.
So in case our audience doesn't know what modification is, after people are divorced, if they have kids or they were never married and they have kids, they can keep fighting about
That's right.
those kids.
Until they're 18. Ooh, that's true.
So they bring a new lawsuit called a modification. That's harder because they've obviously not been satisfied with the underlying order.
Sure. Something
They're-
hasn't worked.
Yeah, they're in high conflict already. Maybe they're going to be in it forever. But 92%, that's very high.
I mean, that's an estimate. I'd have to really look
Yes.
at my numbers. I do keep them because, like, for example, I think I posted that I mediated my 1,100th case by Zoom last week.
Wow.
I am approaching 2,500 mediations since I left the bench, and that's all varieties. So I keep the numbers. What I haven't really is broken down entirely because I just kind of keep the running total. But it's definitely high. I mean, the settlement rate is definitely
Yes.
high because the cost is high going to a stranger to decide not just the stuff you earned your entire marriage, but your kids.
Oh, right,
I mean,
right.
your kids that's a big deal.
Yeah, trial is not I think only someone with a mental disorder goes to trial. Like one of the two has truly, like we all say, oh, they're crazy, but usually they're not actually clinically crazy.
Right.
But for someone to go to trial, I think it usually is because one of them is. Because they just can't enter into a rational settlement. They're not capable of it. And so you have to try those. That's my theory. But I always tell people the settlement rate is 85%. I think my personal settlement rate is higher, both in my practice and as a mediator. But that's really high. So I always tell them statistics are with us. You know?
It could be closer to 85, 9. It depends.
Yeah,
like you
this
said.
is
I'd have to break it
likely
down.
to settle. And they all think theirs is the, oh, she's so horrible, he's so horrible. This will
Always.
never settle. I'm like, well, I hear that every day. And-
Everyone is a gaslighting narcissist. We know
Oh,
that.
that's the current
That's
term,
it, of
right?
course.
Used to be bipolar. Now
I
it's
just
narcissism.
established in the beginning, we're good. It's your fault. It's your fault. Okay, let's move on. Okay, got it. But yeah, no, they are high, and like I said, I'd have to really break it down by category, and I don't have time for that, Melinda.
I know.
I could.
You're busy solving
I know,
people's problems,
geez.
helping them solve them.
But I think that normally, too, if you resolve something in mediation, they don't necessarily come back, or they come back, to litigation, or they come back to mediation again, realizing, okay, we can work this out in a
Yes,
civilized manner.
yes.
I've seen a lot of repeats. It's terrible. I like to ask people, have you ever been in mediation before?
Yes.
And I've had a couple go, yeah, with you 5 years ago.
How embarrassing.
I'm like, oh, yes, you look great.
I've seen a few people
Oh, wow,
since
yeah,
then.
it was a test. Good job. No, so now I just say, that's wonderful. It's hard because it's hard to know. But it's good if they have lived the dream before in mediation.
Yes.
Unless they've had a really bad experience. Like they
Yes.
felt pressured by the mediator or their lawyer and they felt like they had no option, no choice. So you might get that resistance in the very beginning. But then that's where your personality helps them. Okay, I'm not your first mediator,
Yes.
hopefully. And let's work through this. And look, you don't have to settle. This is not high pressure. If you do not
No.
think it's okay, don't sign it.
But to your point, there are different mediation styles,
True.
and there are some mediators who, I've had mediators yell at me. I'm like, why are we yelling? You're a professional. I'm a professional.
It's not personal.
No, I want the opposite. I want the person to come out of this and feel like there was zero pressure by me or their lawyer to settle. I want them to feel like they entered into this freely
Right.
by their own choice because they think it's absolutely the best. And I don't feel like I am lesser if they don't settle.
You can't solve everything. I mean, that's
Right.
true. But the reality, and I tell people, is, you have children. If you have children, and you're connected forever. Yeah, they hate it, but it's really true. So if I make their lives worse during mediation, it's not going to be better tomorrow.
No.
If anything, it's going to maybe motivate them to really fight. You also have to be really careful what you say, because I don't ever give my opinion. People say, oh, if you heard this case, what would you do? I don't know. Because I'm not listening for, does that sound believable? I'm listening for...
And you're hearing everything and not the evidence that would pass.
No, and
the
I'm
evidence
filtering it out to
standard.
like,
Yeah.
okay, so don't meet at Walmart. Maybe Target works better. Yeah, I'm thinking, how do we solve the problem? Not, is that really true that it happened there? So sometimes if you don't have the right approach, and there are cases where like I've had lawyers tell me, I need you to really tell them what the law is. And I said, well, I mean, we can talk through it, but I'm not going to be, I'm firm as far as, I don't think that's going to work over there. Okay. I mean, I'll say, this might blow up the whole thing. I'll do it because you asked me.
Yeah.
And then in the other room, I try to find a less explosive way to deliver the message, because we are a messenger to some extent. But if you don't have the right personality, I think sometimes it's challenging because people will shut down. Now, I'm a little sarcastic, I may or may not curse in 21 languages. I can behave. I promise you, I'm behaving now.
You're behaving so well.
Melinda told me I had to, so there you go. But some people just don't. But even those people, usually after they feel comfortable and know that the process isn't geared against them, this is not, how do you beat up on your spouse day? It's also not, you're going to, judge them for looking at naked women or whatever. We have lots of that stuff too. And I just blink and go, okay, anyway, were your kids exposed? Did you, there's other reasons that could be important versus, your own hobbies. But once they feel like, okay, this is a safe place, and that's what I tell them, this is your safe room, speak freely, be yourself, curse if you want, I don't care. I mean, this sucks, it's not fun, let's work through it, because what's on the other end of it, if you don't settle, is worse than this. Because you have no control, zero control.
One thing I love about mediation is, my style is, I'm friendly the whole time, and I don't pressure people to settle, but I will tell them, I hate to use the word refuse because it is a little strong, but I might refuse to take an offer over. I'll say, that's a waste of time. They're never going to do it. They're going to march out. Like, why would we do that? So let's think of something else, So I will help guide in that way. So I'm not literally, and I know your style too, you're not just carrying the message back and forth. I'm trying to help them do something that will be productive.
Sure.
Right? So productive is the goal. But what I love is, I would say 99.9% of the time, both clients really like me at the end.
Yes.
They're thanking me, they're hugging me if I'm in person. So,
and that's good, because it means you did your job the way you should, which is being the useful participant, not the hindrance nor the inflammatory person that just makes them more mad.
I think that whole yelling at people is a little bit old school. Like, I think older, 20 years ago, mediators, there was more mediators like that. And now I think there's more mediators like us.
Possibly. Well, and I'm just, now my mind is like, now I'm going to have to think about his, I've been yelled at, of course. But I was also thinking, when you're getting an offer that's just crazy, that sometimes I'll try to kind of turn it into, well, let's think about this for a second. Before I take it over there and basically start a fire and they get backed off and leave, let's think about how they're going to receive the message. How do you think he or she's going to take that? And then when they process, and I'll say, remember, you told me this person is a control freak and micromanages everything in your life and blah, 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 whatever it is that kind of leaning into what they have said is the personality defect of the other room, whether I believe it or not. How do we couch this in a way that we can reach your goal? Because if I'm delivering a message that's so offensive, I've had lawyers like, nope, we're done. And I'm like, wait, hang on. You don't get to just leave. Wait. That's tough for us, because then our job is harder when we're still trying to get everyone to the table, not necessarily in the middle, maybe here, maybe there, maybe something here. And sometimes that really helps, especially when they understand you heard what they said about the challenges they had with that partner or the spouse or whatever. And not that you're just like, you're emotional. Which, by the way, never mind. I can't tell that story. Anyway, I'll tell you after. But yeah, that you are appreciating the whole emotional part of the process too, not just the pots and pans and how do we divide the stuff.
Yes. They're real people.
Yeah.
Do you ever mediate temporary orders?
I do, quite a bit.
I think that's
whole team
helpful, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for our viewer in a litigated matter, in family law, they might have a temporary hearing where they decide while this case is pending, who's going to have the children when, who's going to do what on paying bills or paying temporary spousal support, that kind of thing. And that's a very common hearing. Those hearings occur more than final trials.
True.
But instead of having a hearing, they could try to mediate that.
Absolutely.
And I think that's great because the model of that hearing is a lot of throwing of dirt.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, that's just how it is. Like if you want to go fight to have the child more of the time, you have to tell the problems. And mediation is confidential.
Mm-hmm.
You're not doing that in a public, it's private. You're not doing that in a public forum. And maybe you could avoid the need for that, and you still have a right to do it. If mediation fails, which most of them don't, they still have a right to trial.
And
Still have a right to
depending on your
temporary hearing.
county, every county, not only dockets are swamped, but have their own rules. Like in Collin County, there's the 20-minute rule, which is temporary orders are 20 minutes aside. I have to tell you, when I was on the bench in Collin County, I used that as a guide, like, hey, everybody, let's try to be efficient. And let's not talk about characterization of property because I can't do anything about that at temporary. But I always left lots of space because you may not get the evidence and information. And it's almost impossible to question and cross-examine and examine even one witness in 20 minutes. Plus, there are some judges who don't like to modify temporary orders or review. And depending on what's happening on their dockets and the cases, you may be going 6 months, a year under a temporary order that does not work.
Yeah.
And then you're kind of dug in and set. And then the other room decides, well, that's what the judge is going to do at final, which they may not. They are not
Right.
bound by the temporary orders,
No.
but they might.
Yeah, it's hard, especially if there was a lawyer mistake or they didn't manage that 20 minutes well, then it's not as good of a predictor of what's going to happen at final when they can put on their case better. So I agree with you.
Or if you have an associate judge hear your temp orders, and then the main
Different judge.
district judge, different judge hear the final. And usually they have some pretty similar mindsets, but not always.
No.
And they may hear evidence differently. They're going to hear a lot more witnesses usually.
Something has happened in the
It
meantime.
could, oh, absolutely. Things could get totally turned upside down. So I think it is a
mediate
good,
often.
every day. Come on over. Yeah.
More than once. Come see us. Well, I'm excited for you and your litigation center.
Thank you.
With all of these very well-regarded people, many former judges.
Correct.
And people like the judicial to hear something from a judge. I do think that is a good credential to have as a mediator. The judges have to change their mindset from telling people what to do to helping them reach solution, and you immediately had done that.
You have to
So-
stay in your lane, which when you said that, I just remembered, I'm so sorry, Judge Chatham. Andy Chatham, former Judge Dallas, District Judge, is also on the team. Oh my gosh, don't kill me. Yeah, so we do have me, Judge Turner, Judge Hunter, and Judge Chatham, 4 former district, 1 associate, 3 district judges, and then other board certified mediators. And you do have to stay in your lane. You probably have had this experience where there are times when I thought, okay, I mean, if that's the offer, I mean, well, and sometimes it's when you have someone who's not super prepared and
Yes.
they're potentially making an offer that is worse than they would probably get, but you can't tell them because you're not their lawyer. You're just like,
Right,
okay,
right.
but I'll make that. But
Oh, it breaks my heart if I feel like somebody is not well represented. And so I hope if, regular folk out there listening to this, if your lawyer isn't calling you to get prepared, you call your lawyer to
absolutely.
get prepared.
Absolutely, I agree.
Thank you so much for
sure,
being
I
here
love being here.
today.
It's always a
It was wonderful to have
Thank you so much.
And that's it for the Melinda Eitzen Show today. Please tune in next time. Thanks for listening.